Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajajanarana Yashodanandana Vrajajanarana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Vrajajanarandana Yashodanandana Vrajajanarandana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Bhrivrajikacharya Stotarasta Sri Srimad His Divine Grace Sri Bhakti Vedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Gaur Samaveta Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai All grace the assembled devotee All grace the assembled devotee All grace the assembled devotee All grace to Shri Shri Guru Gaur. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 6, Purusha Sukta confirmed, Text 22. Word meanings: Yasmat, from whom, Andam, the universal globes, Virat, the gigantic universal form, Jagye, appeared, Bhuta, elements, Indriya, senses, Guna Atmaka, qualitative, Tat Dravyam, the universes and the universal form, etc., Atyagat, surpassed, Vishwam, all the universes, Gobihi, by the rays, Surya, the sun, Iva, like Atapan, distributed rays and heat. Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Yobhi surya ivatapan Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Yobi surya ivatapan Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Gobi surya ivatapan Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Yogi surya ivatapan Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Yogi surya ivatapan Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Yogi surya ivatapan Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka Tadravyamatyagad vishvam Yogi surya ivatapan
Yasmarandam virajagye Bhutendriya gunatmaka
Bhutendriya gunatmaka
Tadravyamatyagad vishvam
Yogi Surya Yuvatapam. Yasmarandam Virajagye Bhutendriya Gunatmaka Tadravyam Utyagravishvam Yogi Surya Yuvatapam. Translation. From that personality of Godhead, all the universal globes and the universal form with all material elements, qualities, and senses are generated. Yet he is aloof from such material manifestations, like the sun, which is separate from its rays and heat. Srila Prabhupada's purport. The Supreme Truth has been ascertained in the previous verse as Purusha or Purushottama, the Supreme Person. The Absolute Person is the Ishvara, or the Supreme Controller, by his different energies. The Ekapad Vibhuti, manifestation of the material energy of the Lord, is just like one of the many mistresses of the Lord, by whom the Lord is not much attracted, as indicated in the language of the Gita, Vinna Prakriti. But the region of the Tripad Vibhuti, being a pure spiritual manifestation of the energy of the Lord, is, so to speak, more attractive to him. The Lord therefore generates the material manifestations by impregnating the material energy, and then within the manifestation, he expands himself as the gigantic form of the Vishvarupa. The Vishvarupa, as it was shown to Arjuna, is not the original form of the Lord. The original form of the Lord is the transcendental form of Purushottama, or Krishna himself. It is very nicely explained herein that he expands himself just like the sun. The sun expands itself by its terrible heat and rays, yet the sun is always aloof from such rays and heat. The impersonalist takes into consideration the rays of the Lord without any information of the tangible, transcendental, eternal form of the Lord known as Krishna. Therefore Krishna, in his supreme personal form, with 2 hands and flute, is bewildering for the impersonalist, who can accommodate only the gigantic Vishvarupa of the Lord. They should know that the rays of the sun are secondary to the sun, and similarly the impersonal gigantic form of the Lord is also secondary to the personal form as Purushottama. The Brahma Samhita 537 confirms this statement as follows. Ananda chinmaya rasa pratibhavitabhis thabhirya eva nijarupa taya kalabhi goloka eva nivasatya kilatma bhuto govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, the one who enlivens the senses of everyone by his personal bodily rays, resides in his transcendental abode called Goloka. Yet he is present in every nook and corner of his creation by expansion of his happy spiritual rays, equal in power to his personal potency of bliss. He is therefore simultaneously personal and impersonal by his inconceivable potency, or he is the one without a second, displaying complete unity in a diversity of material and spiritual manifestations. He is separate from everything, and still nothing is different from him. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. This chapter began, now this is called Purusha Sukta confirmed, so you may have heard this reference, Purusha Sukta. These are famous prayers. They're mentioned at the beginning of the 10th canto, when Bhumi Devi and the demigods went to petition Lord Vishnu for help. They recited the Purusha Sukta prayers. very famous prayers. They glorify the Mahapurusha. Actually, it's in those prayers where it talks about how the Mahapurusha is worshipped with ingredients of himself. Because Lord Brahma and others, they wanted to worship the Lord, but they didn't have anything in the beginning. All they had was the Virat Rupa, actually, the universal form. So it's described that they took parts of him and they worshipped him. So the scholars, they take it the idea that they cut God up and somehow use pieces of God and they worship God with his pieces. You know, they have these strange ideas. They take things literally sometimes. So anyway, these Purusha Sukta prayers. So the idea is the Purusha Sukta prayers are about or addressed to the Virat Purusha, the Supreme Lord, in that way. So the first verses of this chapter up to text 17 are about the Virat Rupa, the universal form of the Lord. And then we start getting glorification of the Purusha behind the Virat Purusha, as Prabhupada is speaking about in his purport. Actually, in the purport he talks about Krishna specifically, but we know that Garbhodakashaya Vishnu is actually the source of what we call the Virat Rupa. Now the Virat Rupa is not an actual form of the Lord, it's a kind of conception. But the way it's presented in many places in the Bhagavatam, it sounds like you're talking about a real person, a real form of the Lord. But it's a material, it's actually, the Lord's material energy, and the point is to connect it with God. So you have some understanding that there's a person behind it all. So look at the material world and see it in that way. So beginning with text 18, we hear about how there are these two worlds, really, the Ekapad Vibhuti and the Tripad Vibhuti. Now, Srila Prabhupada mentions that in the purport today, so I was going to talk about that a little bit. Usually we get the understanding, it's kind of bewildering because you think, well, it's all infinite, so how can you have 3/4 of infinite or 1/4 of infinite? Those are still infinite. Actually, you can get so many infinities from infinity. Sometimes I think of this, just like the rational numbers, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so it goes infinitely. But you also have 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4, and all in. But you actually have an infinite number between 1 and 2. So from this plays well into the idea of Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate. From the infinite, Purna, from the complete, you can get so many other complete wholes from it. So from infinity, you can still get so many infinities. So this idea that 3/4, the material world is 1/4, and the spiritual world is 3/4 of everything. It's just a kind of way to think about how the material world is kind of insignificant. Now there's another way to look at this whole thing, which Prabhupada doesn't talk about, but our acharyas do. Another way of thinking about or describing the characteristics of these two, the Tripad Vibhuti. Because pada just means a part. So the world of 3 parts and the world of 1 part. So instead of thinking 1/4 and 3/4, you can think of it as one world has 3 main constituents to it, and the other world has 1 main constituent to it. So I'm going to read from some commentary of Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur. Now Srila Prabhupada, he talks about, first I'm going to go back to something Prabhupada wrote in 2619. So we're now at 22. So as I was saying, from 18 up to where we are now, there's been some description. This is actually somewhat in the context. Prabhupada in his purports keeps referring back to this idea of Ekapad Vibhuti and Tripad Vibhuti. So in 2619 he wrote, out of the total manifestation of the Sandhini energy of the Lord, 1/4 is displayed in the material world and 3/4 are displayed in the spiritual world. So here Prabhupada brings in this technical term, Sandhini. So of course Krishna has 3 primary energies. The Samvit, Sandhini, and Hladini. This corresponds to Satchit Ananda. We tend to think of it that way, Satchit Ananda. So sometimes we have these lists, I often think of this in our books, and we think, we think, why is it like this? Why these three exactly? But if you think about it, you think, well, it makes so much sense, actually. First, Sandhini means just existence. Sometimes the idea is there in philosophy when they're trying to understand what is God. God is a concept. So they had the idea that God is existence itself, or God is reality. There's only one reality. It exists. Something exists. So this is Sandhini. Something exists. At one time there was a conversation, I think they were from somebody's phone is ringing. It's distracting. Someone asked Prabhupada, I think they were from the Mensa Society. Somebody asked Prabhupada, why is there anything? First Prabhupada kind of chuckled like, what? What kind of question is that? But basically what Prabhupada's explanation was, there's anything because of Krishna. Because there's Krishna, there's anything. So Krishna, he's the source of existence. His one potency of Sandhini means existence. Actually, there are different personalities in charge of these three also. Existence is under the control of Lord Balaram. Or Balaram is the personification of existence, you might say. Krishna is, in one sense, separate from everything, and Krishna wants to enjoy everything. So Balaram, it's from him that everything exists so that Krishna can enjoy it. That's the Sandhini potency. And then Krishna himself, he's the power behind, you can say, the chit potency, or samvit. That means consciousness, actually. Prabhupada often uses the word knowledge. We say eternity full of bliss and knowledge. It's not knowledge in the sense that we think of as, knowledge is contained in books, that kind of thing. It actually means consciousness. In fact, in the Vedanti Tattva Vidas Tattvam Yad Jnanam Advayam Brahmeti Paramatmeti Bhagavaniti Shabdyate, this important verse in the second chapter of the first canto of the Bhagavatam. The word that's used there for the absolute truth is that it's Advaya Gyan. Advaya means it's one. There's only one truth. I was thinking one way we can think of that is that, well, there's only one reality. We're trying to figure out what it is, but it can only be one thing. So Advaya Gyan, what is that one reality? It's Gyan, but Gyan here means consciousness, actually. It means chit. So that's Krishna. The samvit potency, that's overseen by Krishna himself. And then, of course, the third of these three is Hladini Shakti. Hladini means that's Srimati Radharani. She's Krishna's Hladini Shakti, and Krishna, that's how Krishna enjoys. In fact, Krishna only enjoys his Hladini potency. He's enjoying Radharani in all her expansions, all of the enjoyable things in existence. Ultimately, they're coming from Srimati Radharani, who, of course, is an aspect of Krishna. She's one with and different from Krishna. So Prabhupada uses this word here, just elaborating a little bit, where he says, out of the total manifestations of the Sandhini energy of the Lord, so in other words, everything that exists, 1/4 is the material world and 1/4 is displayed in the spiritual world. So then in that same purport he says, in the material world, the planetary systems are arranged in 3 spheres called Triloka, or Swarga, Marcha, and Patala. So we hear about the 14 planetary systems, and we also hear about the 3 worlds. This phrase comes up a lot. All over the 3 worlds. What does that mean? I think it could be broken up in different ways, what the meaning of 3 worlds is. But here Prabhupada takes it as the 3 parts of the material world. And they're summarized sometimes. We know there are 14 of them, but sometimes they're just listed as these 3 groups. Swarga means the heavenly planets and those above it. Marcha means the middle region, the earthly planet where we are. And below that, the subterranean, they're actually literally called the subterranean heavenly planets, although we think of them as hellish because there's no Krishna consciousness there. The bottom one, the very bottom one, is called Patala. So sometimes these 3 words are used for all 3, Swarga, Marcha, and Patala. So he says, so the planetary systems are arranged in 3 spheres called Triloka, and all of them constitute only 1/4 of the total Sandhini energy. Beyond that is the spiritual sky where the Vaikuntha planets exist, beyond the coverings of 7 material 7 material strata. So now Prabhupada's I'm not sure what he refers to. He's referring to actually the 7 upper planetary systems, or if he's talking about the constituents of the material energy. Anyway, in none of the Triloka planetary systems can one experience the status of immortality, full knowledge and bliss. So the material world doesn't have that. These things, immortality, you can't live forever in the material world, and you can't be fully knowledge, again, you can say consciousness, full consciousness of what reality is, and full bliss. And then he says, factual deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from old age, disease, etc. are possible only beyond the spherical material coverings of the material sky. So, I'm trying to figure out the order of this further. I need to go back to the verse. But in text, death fruit of, is it 18? Anyway, let me continue reading here. So now here's Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur's commentary, a part of his this is the verse, his translation, or his suggested translation, Bhanu Swami's translation, according to the commentary of Vishwanath. The wise know that the living beings are situated within the portions designated by the Lord, whose feet protect all places. That's another reason they're called pada, because everything is situated at the lotus feet of the Lord. Pada. So now this is the important part I'm getting to here. Eternity, absence of sickness, and absence of fear of committing offenses are fixed in the spiritual world, situated above the 3 gunas. So I'll read the part of his commentary here. Above the coverings of the universe, Trimurdana, that's from the verse, Sanskrit, there is no death, amritam, no sickness, kshamam, and no fear arising from offenses to the Lord among the persons there. Absence of fear from time is already covered in the word amritam. This verse explains the Purusha Sukta phrase, Padosya Vishvabhutani Tripadasya Amritam Devi. The living entities of the universe are 1/4, and in the spiritual world there are 3 parts. In the spiritual world of 3 parts, everything is eternal. So what's being referred to here? Let me read Srila Prabhupada's translation. This is text 19. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is to be known as the supreme reservoir of all material opulences by the 1/4 of his energy in which all the living entities exist. Deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from the anxieties of old age and disease exist in the kingdom of God, which is beyond the 3 higher planetary systems and beyond the material coverings. So there seems to be some suggestion that the Tripada can also mean it has these 3 constituents. Not that it's 3/4, in a kind of geometrical kind of way, but it has these 3 parts to it. So what are these 3 parts? Deathlessness, fearlessness, and freedom from the anxieties of old age and disease. These are the 3. And in the verse we have this, Amritam, Kshemam, and Abhayam. Now Amritam, of course, means deathlessness, and Abhayam means fearlessness. And Kshemam, the acharyas quote this in different ways. I was looking online to see it. Really, it means auspiciousness. That's you might say the root definition of it is auspiciousness. So what is it? An auspicious place is a place where there's no old age, disease, and death. There's no suffering. Everything is good there. So that's the spiritual world. There are no problems in the spiritual world. That's Kshemam. So Amritam, Kshemam, and Abhayam, these 3 are characteristics of the spiritual world. These 3 padas are there, these 3 parts. And the material world is the place of mrityu, the place of death. That's the one overriding quality of the material world. It's ekapad, vibhuti. Vibhuti means, of course, opulence, or energy, or expansion, kind of expansion. It's Krishna's energy are all expanding from him. So the material world is the place of deathlessness. So we can see the stark contrast between these two. There's one place, no deathlessness, no fear, everything is auspicious. In the other place, everyone's just dying. That's the Ekapad Vibhuti. So let me really read a little bit more from these commentaries. This is more from Vishwanath Chakrabarti. This is from verse 20. It says, this verse explains the previous verse, the one I was just referring to. Beyond the coverings of Prakriti, Bahi, so Bahi is the external, described by the word Trimurdana, top of the three gunas, exists the spiritual world described as three parts, Trayopada. So here you can see the idea. It's described as three parts. But three parts of what? Or does it mean it has three parts, or it's three parts of the four parts? So it can be taken either way, it seems like. The word cha after Bahi indicates that sometimes the three parts exist within the material world in places like Mathura. So, of course, the spiritual world, with the qualities of the spiritual world, descends with Krishna. So the dhams, they have these characteristics. At least they're there, but they're hard to realize and connect to unless you're a devotee of the Lord. Now, let's see, this is the acharyas. They, here's something from Jiva Goswami. Now, he quotes a verse, Prabhupada actually mentions it in verse 18. He says, the glories of the Lord in the transcendental 75%, and Prabhupada uses that, of the Lord's internal potency are stated in the Padma Purana. Now, Prabhupada is taking this from the commentaries of Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakrabarti, who both quote a verse from the Padma Purana. Tripad Vyapti Param Tham Ni Padosya Bhavat Puna. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's actually like 2 verses, or 3 verses. But this is the translation. The spiritual realm is spread over 3 parts. One part, the spiritual world is spread over 3 parts. The one part is this world. The 3-part spiritual world is eternal. The power of the one part is temporary. The eternal form of the Supreme Lord is situated in that glorious place. That form of the Lord is without decay, eternal, full of pastimes, eternally young, eternally enjoying, and surrounded by Sri Bhumi and Ishwari. So that's from the Padma Purana. So the idea is they're quoting this to show that the Lord exists in that 3-part abode. And Jiva Goswami also says, according to this concept of Tripad Vibhuti, the following statement in the 2nd canto should be understood. So that's the verse that mentions these 3 things. According to this concept of Tripad Vibhuti, the following statement, according to this concept, that it's the place of transcendence, really. So again, he refers to this. It's Amrita, it's Abhaya, and now here he translates Kshema, the 3rd one, which was saying auspiciousness. He refers to it as security. So that's another way of saying fearlessness, you can say also. So then in Jiva Goswami's commentary, which is quite extensive, he quotes over and over again many verses showing that he takes the 3 qualities, and for each one of these 3 qualities, he finds a verse, he quotes a verse that demonstrates that this is actually there in Vaikuntha. In Vaikuntha, everything is immortal, everyone and everything is immortal, and there's complete fearlessness in Vaikuntha, and so on. There's complete auspiciousness. So he quotes other shastras, especially from the Bhagavatam, to substantiate that Vaikuntha is the place where these 3 things exist. So let's see, this is more from is it? Let's see, yeah, Vishwanath. Oh no, this is from Jiva Goswami. The 4 parts of the Lord's manifestation, Chatushpad Aishwarya, so of course Aishwarya means opulence, Chatushpad, 4 parts, composed of 3 parts in the spiritual world and 1 part in the material world is described. Verse 17, describes one pada, since it is the place for results of karma, martyam annam. So as I was saying, the Virat Purusha was described up through text 17. So we're describing the material world, or Shukadeva Goswami is describing the material world up through 17. So that's the place of Martya Loka, the place of death. This illustrates the meaning of Padosya Vishva Bhutani Tripadasya Amritam Divi. 3 parts are in the spiritual world and 1 part is made of all beings in the material world. Then in his commentary on text 20, the place of Tripad is attained by persons belonging to ashrams with no offspring. There's actually a verse. Well, this is it, I guess. The Brahmachari, Vanaprastha, and Sannyasa ashram. So if you want to go to Maharloka, Janaloka, Tapaloka, or Satyaloka, you have to be celibate. So from those 3 ashrams that are celibate. So here's another meaning of the word Tripad. Since it is attained by 3 ashrams, it is also called Tripad out of the 4. So that's another reason why it can be called Tripad, because you have to be, even these places, this place, of course these places are in some sense transcendental. They're not exactly transcendental, but if you read Srimad Bhagavatam, you'll see that all that goes on there is devotional service, sacrifice and worshiping the Lord and meditation on the Lord and so on. So they're almost spiritual. They're above Swarga Loka. Swarga is a place of enjoyment. So then the place of renunciation and glorification of the Lord and so on. So in some sense it's like Vaikuntha there, very close. Okay, so there's some more explaining basically these same points about Tripad Vibhuti. So just briefly, a little something about Prabhupada's commentary. It's interesting that Prabhupada talks about how the impersonalists, they can't appreciate the person of Godhead from whom all this energy, because the verse is about how the energy is all coming from the Purusha, the Supreme Purusha, the Lord Vishnu. But the impersonalists, they can only experience and appreciate the material energy, which Prabhupada says is not very attractive to Krishna. You know, she's described as standing behind the Lord. She's ashamed to come before the Lord. Because it's interesting because she's doing service for the Lord, but still she doesn't like it. Because she has to punish the jivas, try to test them. Really what she's doing is she's preparing them for Krishna consciousness, getting rid of all their impurities. But she's a difficult taskmaster. She's a warden of the prison, so she has to punish the jivas. And the jivas, of course, they're Krishna's devotees. So she has this kind of uncomfortable relationship with the service that she has to do. So it's said that she's ashamed to come before the Lord. And if Prabhupada said here, Krishna's not really attracted to her because she's doing this nasty work. Even though she's doing it for a purpose, still he's not exactly comfortable with it, you might say. Just like a loving parent has to rebuke the child sometimes, chastise the child, and the parent doesn't necessarily like doing it. Sometimes, parents say, this hurts me more than it hurts you, right? That's the cliche, and the kid thinks, yeah, right. But in some sense, it's true. Krishna's uncomfortable with it. So the impersonalists, but still the impersonalists, they don't, for some reason, they're so contaminated, they can't approach Krishna. And that's why this Virat Purusha, one of the benefits of it is to help the impersonalists as well. Because they see the whole universe as God. This is kind of an impersonal idea. People have that idea today, even. Yes, the universe is God. Nature is God, and so on. So it's kind of impersonal. So you can look at it and think that way. So it's better than the complete impersonalism, actually. You're personifying it in some way. In some ways that's good. And in some way, and what you're doing, you're actually, because of your awe in relationship to nature, to the material energy, it's a kind of devotion. In fact, there are people who are really devoted to nature. So what is that nature? It's coming from Krishna. It's Krishna's energy. They're devoted to Krishna's energy, but they don't really know it. So that is, some ways, you can say that's helpful. It has some purifying effect. Because they're in touch with Krishna, it's removed, binna, as Prabhupada quotes from Bhagavad Gita, his prakriti, material energy, is separated from him, but still, ultimately, it's one and different. As Prabhupada ends the purport here, everything is one with Krishna, but separated from him at the same time. But still, he's never, ultimately, nothing ultimately is separate from Krishna. Of course, that's the essential lesson we're trying to realize in Krishna consciousness, that everything is connected with Krishna. So that's part of why this whole description is here. It was explained earlier that because what do we know? What do we know? We know the material energy. That's all we know. We know the creation. So when you're talking about, when Sutta Goswami or Shukadev Goswami begins preaching, he'd say trying to bring people along to Krishna consciousness, first he talks about them in their situation. Okay, you know the material world. So, you know what? Somebody created this material world. Let's hear about that. Let's hear about that person. So the idea is that it's something they can relate to. Because Krishna is really, he's so far beyond. That's why we can see that people that can't relate to Krishna in a certain way. Well, how can this be God? This person, is it a boy, is it a girl? Why is it blue? And what's going on here? So Krishna is so far beyond, really. That's in fact the whole Bhagavatam. It has 10 subjects. So the first 9 are leading us up to where we can kind of get, at least we can appreciate something about Krishna, because we're going to hear extraordinary things about him. So we don't think it's just mythology. No, this is the person behind the person who made this creation. So just imagine how great he is. The person who created all of this, he's just a part of a part of a part of a part of Krishna. So just imagine how great Krishna is. So that's why it's important to read these things. You know, in the Bhagavatam, they may not be as ecstatic as Krishna's Leelas in Vrindavan, but they're important for us to get our foundation. Because we may think we know Krishna, but we don't really know Krishna. You don't know Krishna until you've transcended, until you have prema. You don't really know Krishna. Because what do we know about what do we know about Samvit, Sandhini, and Ladini, these things? They're interacting and they're personified and so on. So when Krishna is doing something, it's sort of like, it's like we're getting a picture, not the actual thing. Where the actual thing requires some more purification. All right, going on here, let me stop. Let's read the translation again. From that personality of Godhead, all the universal globes and the universal form with all material elements, qualities, and senses are generated. Yet he is aloof from such material manifestations, like the sun, which is separate from its rays and heat. Our philosophy is achintya bheda bheda tattva. So this is a verse that supports that philosophical view. So, anybody have anything?
Two questions. Let me do one first. You were saying knowledge is interpreted as consciousness. I mean, knowledge is interpreted. Is that? Knowledge, sat.
Yeah, I'm hearing knowledge, but I'm not hearing anything else. What else are you saying?
Interpreted as consciousness.
Yeah, the word, I'm saying the translation of the word chit, it probably often translates it as knowledge, but it's actually consciousness. You can say it's consciousness without content. Right? It's just consciousness itself without being conscious of something. But we think of knowledge in a different way. In fact, even the word knowledge itself is difficult. I mean, I've looked it up in the dictionary. And what do you really mean by knowledge? What is knowledge? Is it data? Sometimes I think of it, is knowledge data? Or is knowledge something I have? And is knowledge understanding? What exactly is knowledge? So, of course, you can argue about consciousness too, and the scientists too, they're trying to figure out what consciousness is. But anyway, that was my simple point. The eternity full of bliss and knowledge. Knowledge, really the idea is consciousness. And Prabhupada does translate it that way sometimes. But he tends to translate it as knowledge and not consciousness. But he does sometimes translate chit as consciousness.
Yeah, and the other part is, the text is saying, all the globes, I have to speak louder, all the globes coming from the Lord. But in one sense it can sound like universes, but also it can sound like planets also. I mean, depends how you interpret it. Really.
Well, he's talking about Andam. Andam means the egg-like universe. He's talking about the universes that come out from the pores of Mahavishnu. That seems to be the context. Ragatmaka Prabhu.
I particularly noted one thing you read describing the spiritual world, where it stated, fear, or it's free from fear, which rises from offenses to the Lord.
Yeah.
That's I've never heard. I can understand how fear rises from mortality, but that was nice to hear that too. Did you have any thoughts?
Yeah,
on
that was Vishwanath's way of presenting it. Mm-hmm. And Jiva Goswami presented it in a different way, but yes, that was the phrase. And because the word is just abhaya, it means fear, no fear, fearlessness. But he translates it as no fear arising from offenses to the Lord. Mm-hmm. Among persons there. Of course, in the spiritual world, there are no offenses. And we're here in the material world because of our offenses, ultimately. Actually, if you read the Madhurya Kadambani, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, where he traces the steps, Ado, Shraddha, Tatu Sadhu Sangha, and so on, all the way up to Prema. So when he talks about anartha nivritti, getting rid of our anarthas, there are different kinds of anarthas. So ordinary, breaking scriptural rules, for example, that's one, you get some kind of reaction for that. And that, you get rid of the reactions to those very quickly in Krishna consciousness. But the last stain, you can say, from the offenses to get rid of are those made by offenses. And those are not completely washed away until you get to the bhava stage. The reaction to offenses, especially offenses to Vaishnavas, are so, the reaction that they become so deep within us that it takes a lot of anartha nivritti and purification all the way up to the stage of bhava before that's completely washed away. Then you attain prema. So, that's why we hear how dangerous offenses are. So that Vishwanath Chakravarti is emphasizing all fear in the material world. It's what keeps us here in the material world is our offenses against Krishna and his devotees.
Oh, thank you for that elucidation. Okay, also you mentioned kshemam. Someone translates it as secure. That was really noteworthy, how we can see all around us, people in the material world, and we ourselves sometimes, we get this sense of insecurity, with what not knowing the future. It made me recall, there's a verse in the first canto, if you can recall it, describing the only safe place in this material world is the chanting and hearing of the holy name of Krishna Katha. Do you recall what verse that is? A safe boat. It's a boat.
It's one of the first verses of Shukadev Goswami in the beginning of the second canto, I'm pretty sure. Where he said, Ichito, how does it go? Abhayam. Anyway, the word is there. Hear about, glorify, remember, and worship the Lord if you want to be free from fear. That's the verse,
Okay, thank you.
Actually, this word kshema, of course, it comes up in Yoga Kshemam Baham Yaham. Krishna says, I carry what they lack and preserve what they have. So there's preserve, security, you can get the idea, they're the same concept.
Haribol, thank you for nice class. So you mentioned that to go to above Sargaloka, one needs to be celibate.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Read from somewhere. So Prabhupada writes in 1st canto, 9th chapter, 6 and 7 text, Vasishta Muni, the great celebrated sage amongst the Brahmanas, well known as the Brahmarshi Vasishta Deva. And at the end he says, he is also one of the 7 rishis and husband of Arundhati. So it's not celibate. So can you please elaborate more?
I don't know. I'm looking to see, I think it's one of the verses in this section where it says that. Yeah. This is text 20. The spiritual world, which consists of 3/4 of the Lord's energy, is situated beyond this material world, and it is especially meant for those who will never be reborn. Others who are attached to family and do not strictly follow celibacy vows must live within the 3 material worlds. Now maybe it's in this purport. I think it was Vishwanath Chakrabarti where he was talking about that. So I don't know. I can't fix it. Lord Brahma's not, well, I don't know if he's what he is. Brahma's got a body that's out there, body of intelligence or something like that, pervades the whole material world, the whole universe. But actually, if you read in the Brihad Bhagavatam what's going on there, they don't have any need for sex life, that's for sure. They're all completely in samadhi, basically, all of the persons there. So I'm pretty sure there's actually another verse it makes this same point. Celibates go there, and the grihastas, they make it to Indra's place. Of course, the Bhagavatam, it's really down in grihastas, pretty much. There's a lot of really heavy talk about grihastas. Of course, griyamadis, but even the context sometimes. Because who's one of the who's one of the heroes of the Bhagavatam is Narada Muni. So wherever he goes, he's just trying to get everyone to take sannyas. That's Narada Muni. He got in trouble with Daksha. When you read that section, you think, well, what's Daksha doing wrong? He's not doing anything wrong. He's raising his kids to be nice grihastha devotees. No? Of course, he blew it when he offended Narada Muni. But he was an exalted soul. He got darshan of the Lord, Daksha. But still, that's what, Narada is kind of a troublemaker. He's a messenger. It's so interesting, actually. You go through the Bhagavatam and Narada's everywhere. There's one purport that Gopi Pranadhan Prabhu gives in the Brihad Bhagavatamrita, which Narada comes on the scene. It's like 3 or 4 pages. All the scenes, all the cameos of Narada Muni in the Bhagavatam. He comes in. Anytime somebody gets a message, pretty much, comes from Narada. Narada's always, he's the messenger delivering. But he does this also. He's really, he's a brahmachari himself, Naishtika brahmachari. So he has this mood that just get out of this. Like our sannyasis were preaching in the 70s, pulling all the grihastha men out of the temples and taking them. And so I guess they inherited that from Narada Muni. So he does that. So anyway, you get sometimes things, they seem contradictory, so you have to look at the context a lot of times to figure out, Even Prabhupada, he says things sometimes. One thing I noticed, in fact, I looked at this, I was going to check again to double check, because I'm pretty sure I checked. Because I was thinking how we often say, in a sense, right? So many things we say. Because sometimes you say something and then you say, well, so that's in a sense it's like this. In a sense we're one with Krishna. And in a sense we're different from Krishna. So I searched for this phrase, in a sense, but I couldn't find Prabhupada saying it. Prabhupada usually doesn't, hedges what he's saying. He just says things really heavy. And we may be hearing and we may think, well, in a sense, yeah, but there's this other side too. But Prabhupada usually when he's making a point, he's hammering it in. There's a Sanskrit word for this. There are these different nyayas, ardha kukuti nyaya, and this nyaya and that nyaya. So there's one that's called hammering in the post. If you want to tie a horse to a post, you keep beating it and beating it and beating it. So this comes up in Jiva Goswami in his Sandarbhas sometimes. You think, okay, we get it, you know. But no, here's another example. Here's another verse. Here's another verse. Or if you read Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's commentary on the Chaitanya Bhagavat, he has some purports like that, where you think he's quoted every verse in the Bhagavatam that has to do with whatever he's talking about, Paramatma or something. There's verse after verse, page after page after page. And you think, well, I get it, okay. Another verse, another, hammering it in. So Prabhupada, he doesn't, usually, even you hear it like on walks, for example, he'll be making a heavy point like that and someone will try to bring in a sense, kind of thing. No, do you understand? Get this, get this, get this. So the Bhagavatam does that kind of thing sometimes. It doesn't, pull its punches sometimes. It just says it to make a point. I guess this point would be how important celibacy is. Where in another place there may be some leniency according to the situation and the point that's being made. So the Bhagavatam is a very, it's an elaborate, deep, broad scripture. It makes so many points to, it's all about refining our understanding, really, is what it is. There are so many subtleties. We want everything to just be black and white. I mean, I know I do. I go crazy, I read purports and I think, well, what exactly is, being said here? Is it this or that? But there are subtleties there. I'll just mention this ISKCON Communications Journal. They just, relaunched it. The second issue came out. I mentioned this in my last class, I think. And I received an advanced PDF copy of it. And it's all about hermeneutics. How do we understand things? How do we study Prabhupada? What do we do when he says this in one place and this in another place? How do we react when Prabhupada says things that aren't true about the material world, or expresses his opinions that don't seem right, or that kind of thing? So a large part of that issue is about that. And very thoughtful, intelligent devotees have written very nice articles about that. It's really, you really see, it's just not black and white. There are ways to look at these things and appreciate them without being offensive. We tend to be so, we're afraid of making offenses, so we try to, in some ways you might say, we become very fanatical. No, it's just like this. Don't tell me anything that, budges me from my absolute conviction about this particular point. Don't give me any gray areas, I can't handle it. But actually the advanced devotee is called Mahatma. The one reason he's Mahatma is that he can accommodate so many things. That's why it's said even you can't understand the mind of the pure devotee, right? This is there in the Chaitanya Charitamrita. Vigyena bhujaya. Because, what's going on. Even it's brought up in these essays in this ISKCON Communications Journal, is that, just like Prabhupada himself, he was an Indian in one sense, you can say. So he did things in an Indian way. But he's not an Indian, of course, we know Prabhupada's not an Indian, he's a pure devotee of Krishna, he's a Krishna Bhakta. But still some of the Indianness comes out sometimes. The culture, the way he was educated and raised, and things that he said from that perspective. So how do we accommodate all of this? How do we take these things without being scared? So I'm applying this to this, this same idea. We come across contradictory things, but that's why, of course, we have to study deeply Srila Prabhupada's books and see things from different angles of vision. Prabhupada said Bhagavatam classes for bringing out many different lights. So there's so many lights. Or like a gem is multifaceted, so each facet gives a different picture, a different look. So Krishna's he's the infinite gem. He's Vaidurya Mani, he's like a multifaceted gem. So he can accommodate these things, and we have to, as we mature in Krishna consciousness, be able to accommodate and understand that this is all part of Krishna's glory, and the glory of the pure devotee as well. All right, we'll stop here. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.